Welcome, Robert. Thanks for waiting around this morning. Pardon my tardiness. Technical problems as usual. These silly things that just don't go right sometimes. We got a sun and a coffee from Daniel. Good morning, Daniel. Hope you're doing well. Heard RFK on Unheard podcast, except for nuclear. He is 100% on. Yeah, I don't know, his thing with nuclear, I still think it's a little bit of fake news getting recycled from the old days. I think he's going to come up with some pretty interesting stuff, so we'll see. I think it's getting recycled, like things he said in the past. We got to give people a chance to learn, right? You got to give people a chance to learn. Good morning, sunshine. Good morning, Jeremy. Thanks for that. We love it. We love it. Another Monday. Hello, world, says Joseph. Cal Casa. Good morning indeed. Good morning. Dex, good morning. Nolan is running, everyone. Nolan is running P-Man Van. You don't have to worry about it. But indeed, I pride myself on keeping good time, and too much going on. Too many little things this morning, but that's okay. We were loaded up early, and then things come up. Hello, Kevin, but you're not here to listen to the production foibles and difficulties that we have to go through. They're not that interesting. What is interesting is I can confirm a sunrise. And although Bitcoin fees are up and there's a lot of congestion in the mempool, just like people waiting this morning, there had to be some people who waited for some Bitcoin transactions in the last little while, but it's still running. So all that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Stop turning off, Pat. I don't understand why you're doing that. So my notes here tell me, and they keep trying to turn off, but that's okay. We've got some wonderful Moscow time today. I mean, some really excellent Moscow time. And it will sync just perfectly into what we're going to talk about for this morning, which is all about literacy, personal responsibility, energy literacy, financial literacy, all of them merging, but along the lines of personal responsibility. But let's see what the fake news has to say. So this is from the BBC, right? So the BBC, my transactions went through no problem. Good, P-Man. Good. Just like this show is going through no problem. A little bit slower getting started. And you got to wait. You have to wait a little bit, right? Some people are having to wait, but, other people are saying, no, wait, everything's good. So, but we're going to talk about it a bit. I've got the right frame to navigate this stuff, I think. But first, Moscow time. We have the BBC, and they have this feature called Future Planet, all about climate change, obviously. And they wanted to get into looking a little bit at the people living ultra low carbon lifestyles, so in association with FedEx. So the people living ultra low carbon lifestyles. So the byline here by Jocelyn Timperley is, to tackle climate change, many of us need to cut our carbon footprints. But what do truly low carbon lifestyles look like? Here it is. And can they really be achieved by personal choice alone? No. Come on. Read the article and you'll see. You can't trust people to handle climate change. They can't handle it on their own. Come on. And the New York Times giving somewhat conflicting information, because they say this morning that if you do indeed have some troubles with climate change, right? So extreme weather, climate change, which are the same thing to them, they have a plan, right? And it goes into personal responsibility as far as I can tell. But here's what they're saying. The New York Times from this morning: backup power, a growing need if you can afford it. Extreme weather linked to climate change is causing more blackouts, but generators and batteries are still out of reach for many. So, but no joke, according to Ryan Maui here, no joke, the New York Times recommends buying gas generator for your home in case of power outages during extreme cold worsened by climate change. As the power grid becomes more unreliable in cold weather, folks may need to spend thousands on backup generators. I wonder why that is. I wonder how we've ended up not having a reliable grid in New England. We'll never know, I guess. We'll never know. That article by the BBC, here's a little bit about what the thing that you can't trust individuals to do is all about, right? So you can't trust individuals. And I think they're right, right? Could you trust individuals to substantially reduce their flying, right? Because long distance travel, that's the low carbon thing. You can't do that, right? We're just going to build high speed rail everywhere and the trains will run at night. So you're going to travel at night, right? Because you're going to travel at night on high speed rail that they haven't built. And now here's another one. Meat and dairy products could be more of a luxury or for a special occasion. I've told you stories about when I was talking with people who grew up in Korea in the 1950s. It's just like them. It's no big deal. You only get meat at once a year. You know, who needs it more than that, right? It's weddings, special occasions, right? So they were already there in the 1960s. What were they doing? Why did they get better? Or why did they get more stuff? And indeed, that's the low carbon world that they're suggesting, right? Just consume way less and everything will be fine, right? But don't leave that to personal choice. Certainly don't leave it to personal choice. We're going to have to mandate that. And that's kind of what's been going on out there, right? All kinds of mandates around energy. Just look at what happened in Germany, right? They celebrated shutting down their nuclear energy. Now, what were the unintended consequences of their lack of financial or energy literacy? Well, here's what had happened, right? This is from Mark Nelson. So what he says is what's happening to Germany is hard to watch, but America is going to make so much money off of it. Germany shut down their finest power plants so that America is going to take them to the shed buying fossil fuels from America. Then we'll take their experts and factories back to America to run off of our nuclear fleet. So here's what's going on. So it turns out that the German company that made all of the heat pumps that America has fallen in love with, right? The heat pumps that we've talked about a few times here. So these heat pumps, it turns out that with what's going on in Germany, the company that actually makes them was bought by Carrier, an American company. So indeed, the entire manufacturing of these heat pumps is going to come to America now that this American company has bought it. And that's just what happened, right? They're not going to be able to make that stuff there anymore. The very tool that was supposed to help the Germans mitigate all of this stuff is now an American company. And just like this fellow mentioned, right? It looks like his name is Mark Nelson at Energy Blance, if you want to follow him. It looks like the Americans are going to sell the machines back to the Germans now. And this is kind of what we're getting at and what much of the problem that Bitcoiners are coming up against. And really the theme of World War III that we've talked about many times here. It really is about personal responsibility. That's the most abstracted way you can come to this decision or this way of framing World War III. So I've mentioned many times about how, even for example, the history of cryptography, right? So the history of cryptography. Remember, before World War II, cryptography was purely seen as a military function. It came from military purposes. Telling secrets, using encryption, decryption was really a part of the military system. It had been for a long time. That's why you hear a lot of terms within cryptography that are named after military maneuvers. For example, the Byzantine generals problem, right? So the Byzantine generals problem was always about how to root out double agents and find a way to engineer away the systemic problem of having a secret agent or a double agent that you don't understand who they are and how to get past having to trust one of them and build a system that doesn't get influenced by one or two or three generals who aren't really on your team, right? So a lot of this stuff came from that world before. Now, what happens after World War II is the Nazi Enigma machine, Alan Turing, the whole imitation game movie that they made, remember? So what happened after World War II is they made weapons. They made cryptography count as a weapon, as like a bullet or a missile or something like that. And so when the first civilian invention in cryptography since the Medici days in Italy happened in America, and it was Whitfield Diffie and Ralph Merkle and Martin Hellman that created public key cryptography and separated the public and private key, the first time the military hadn't been the main innovator in cryptography in 500 years. And this tool, public key cryptography, was sitting there and was invented really because those folks in the 1970s, when it was invented, knew something like the internet was coming and knew that they would need to be able to pass keys along that wouldn't be susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack or other physical attacks on the actual keys. Now, the people who came up with it saw public key cryptography as a discovery, and indeed in mathematics or in any way of looking this in its historical tract, you start to understand that this was a excavation, like a fossil dig. They found it. It wasn't really something they invented. It's something that's always been there, kind of like this magic trick, right? If you actually look at how to pass keys on between people with boxes and locking them, you can physically implement public key cryptography. You just have to watch it happen, and it's a bit of a magic trick, but you'll see, okay, great. That's not susceptible to a man-in-the-middle attack, and you can actually open the boxes using the keys. So it actually abstracts into the physical world, or not abstracts. It actually delineates the abstract idea of public key cryptography, goes into the physical world very easily once you see the trick. I think there's YouTube videos out there if you want to see it. But the point is, in the 1970s, when this stuff was coming on, and this is like a weird thing for me personally. So I'll tell you a quick story about interviewing Whitfield Diffie with Zuko Wilcox, the inventor of Zcash. So I had Zuko. It was Consensus many years ago, and we invited Whit Diffie, and we had this conversation. It was great. It's probably up online somewhere. And in the emails that we had beforehand, before we spoke, I did the little description of our panel saying that Bitcoin was the widest deployment of public key cryptography in the history of the world. And in an email, the actual inventor of public key cryptography told me, you are mistaken. PKI, public key infrastructure, which is how public key cryptography was deployed throughout the internet, is the widest deployment of public key cryptography. And so I had to, to the actual inventor, had to say, well, Bitcoiners don't really think of public key infrastructure as public key cryptography per se, right? Not exactly that. Like, I understand you're using a public and private key. Basically, public key infrastructure, PKI, you're going to hear that a lot if you're not new to the technical parts of Bitcoin and its contrast with typical internet security. Public key infrastructure, something Nick Szabo worked on for many years, something that if you read Nick Szabo's paper on smart contracts, he describes right away as being the hardest part, designing the certificate authority, the person who's in charge of the public and private, or the private key management, is the hardest part of designing any one of these systems, and is always the singular point of fail in almost any security system based on public key infrastructure. So all that is you trade all your information and someone runs your keys for you, because of course, and this is the point that I'm trying to get at, of course, when this stuff was being developed in the 1980s, they believed everyone was too stupid and too dumb to manage keys themselves. Because of course, if you lose your key in a purely public key system that isn't public key infrastructure, with a certificate authority who manages your keys in exchange for your personal information, if you don't build it that way, and you build it the way it was initially invented by Whitfield Diffie, then what you get is a system where there is no authority you can ask for help. Like we all know, if you lose your Bitcoin, right? If you lose your private key, it's over, right? So there's a huge amount of personal responsibility baked into the Bitcoin system. And I remember when Whit wrote that, actually public key infrastructure, I had to say, well, we disagree with your assessment of the deployment of your invention. And even Zuko was like, yeah, sorry, Whit Diffie, we just don't see it that way, right? We don't see PKI as the widest deployment of public key infrastructure in history. We see Bitcoin as the widest deployment of public key infrastructure in history, and the only true implementation, because the moment you create these certificate authorities, you're more or less adhering to an old way of building things. And again, I understand why they did it. We were all deemed in the 1980s, they anticipated, even folks who invented it, like Whit Diffie, who is definitely on the more decentralized program as far as what he wants in the world. I don't want to mind read him too much, but what he's projecting and what he's sort of hoping for. So at the time when this happened, we were deemed too stupid and not capable of taking enough responsibility to manage our own keys. So that was one of the big original sins that a lot of people call it. They call it the original sin of the internet by not more widely distributing and authentically distributing public key cryptography throughout the system for all kinds of reasons. That we baked so much PKI into it, so much public key infrastructure into it, was what a lot of people believed opened the door for all of these third-party parasitical entities that will brainwash you and spin you and lie to you, and you know, all because they know a lot about you because you had to share that information in order for them to run cryptographic keys for you, right? So because Bitcoin made the key the currency, and it made simple possession enough for authentication, right? So we know who you are in Bitcoin simply because you hold the private key. That's enough. And that's what makes it, of course, a push transaction. That's what makes it very different from everything else that's going on the internet as far as interacting. So Bitcoiners immediately, and that was my blind spot. I said it from when I began in the industry. I came at it from a law point of view, did not understand cryptography. I did not pursue knowledge necessarily in computer science, right? I got a little bit of that, but I wasn't sitting around saying I got to learn how to code and all that stuff. As someone who was trained in the law, I understood how to code or write in code or think in code because law is very similar to computer programming. Did you know this little historical anecdote? Steve Jobs used to say that all lawyers and computer programmers should get automatic American citizenship no matter where they are in the world. And he said, not because we need more lawyers or computer programmers. That's not the reason. It's because both groups simply know how to think. They know how to say, if A is this and B is that, then we can deduce C is this because X, Y, Z. That whole ability to use syllogisms, to use logic, to go back to Aristotelian systems of thinking and deducing and ordering thoughts, right? It's really just law school is just a big exercise in ordering thoughts, being able to order them in the right way, which is why it's already so susceptible. Both computer programming and legal contract writing are already so susceptible to AI, probably the most susceptible industries, because the logic is the writing is the most logical and linear and consequential. If then. Very simple for AI to figure that out, right? If then. So it's the concept already that we abandoned personal responsibility at the battlefront of cryptographic keys. That happened when it did opened the door for this new, let's call it prioritization of personal responsibility. And Bitcoiners come from that world of understanding, well, we ought to have been able to manage our own keys, right? We ought to have been able to manage our own systems to authenticate on the internet. Now, it seemed like a little story back in the 80s and 90s when Adam Back and all these people were complaining about it, right? But what they were really getting at, this aspect of personal responsibility, of having to be not just a cog in a wheel, but someone who has a real job and a real responsibility to yourself in order that the machine might work. So not contributing as a small cog that is unaware of what's going on, and do your job and don't question what else is happening and don't even think about how the system works. As someone who went to law school, I used to always say that the thing I got out of law school, right? Now, I'm not recommending anyone go be a lawyer, but what is good about law school is you actually start to see government and laws and systems as an engine. And you can say, well, that's where it's broken. And the same way that a mechanic would look into a car and say, well, okay, that's the thing, right? You start to actually see it as a motor, as an engineering problem. And if it's just an engineering problem, it's a lot easier to intellectualize and think about and all those things. So Bitcoiners already understood it wasn't about being a cog in the wheel. It was about themselves being a functional piece so that the whole machine might work, right? So Bitcoiners understood that from a very early age and a very early time. And a major part of the thrust behind Bitcoin is getting behind financial literacy and understanding what's going on in that world, right? So even take a look this weekend. We had, Munger and Warren Buffett, right? They do their thing, their big fake thing where they go to his house in Omaha and they say, oh, it's the same old house. He doesn't care about money. He's been living in this suburban house for however many years, right? Obviously a complete scam, right? He does not live there. And if he does, have you seen the back of it? There's like a whole nother house put on, right? So that whole thing is a scam. But here's the interesting part. So he was getting questioned, and a little girl, right? A little girl, 13-year-old girl in this staged conference they do every single year. A little girl asked him what she thought about the US dollar losing reserve currency status, right? So first of all, no journalists asking Warren Buffett this question, right? Just this 13-year-old girl. And his answer was, nobody knows how far you can go with a paper currency before it gets out of control, particularly if you are the world's reserve currency. And he tried to, go on about a few more things along those lines. He said there's where was it? Oh yeah. So here's what he says, right? He says he says Bitcoin is a joke, obviously, right? If you think of tokens as the world's reserve currency, it's a joke. Forget about all the toys, it's a joke. I think of any tokens, it's madness. And when it comes to reserve currency of the world, but then he says it's also madness to keep printing money, right? So a lot of people picked up on that, and you get Preston Pish, who says everyone understands the problem and can pontificate for 15 minutes about all the various angles of said problems, right? Unlimited problem identifiers, very few problem solvers. So when Warren Buffett just says, oh, this doesn't work and that doesn't work, what's the actual answer? And that's where this financial literacy and personal responsibility piece comes into play. Now, even look at this, this horrible story that's gripping America right now. Just horrible. The subway story, right? Now, what happened is horrible, but the spin on top of it and everything that's going on with the Michael Jackson dancing, but actually he was a criminal and tried to kidnap children, and actually he was violent and hadn't been dancing in years. But anyway, we don't need to get into all of that, right? The issue then becomes really the people who stopped him and killed him, right? So the people who stopped this fella and killed him are getting in trouble because they made a choice in a moment, or some people are saying they should be arrested, right? They made a choice in a moment. Now, when you make a choice in those moments and you are the one taking responsibility the way these guys did, it's very difficult to say whether they should have done it this way or that way. They had to make a choice, just like people today in the economy have to make a choice. You don't get to sit and make the perfect choice. You have to make a choice based on what you've got around you. And for Warren Buffett to say, oh, this doesn't work, but they shouldn't do it, but nobody knows how much money you can actually print, and this looks really dangerous, but the Bitcoin thing is really stupid, so that's also dumb. But people go to this guy, the Oracle of Omaha, for answers. The Oracle of Omaha, right? For answers about the biggest questions in the land. What did he have for people? Well, he said that looks like there's too many people in banking and too many smart people, which we agree with, right? We don't need this many wealth managers. He's been saying that for years. He also said that AI, don't worry about it. It's just hype. And actually, old-fashioned intelligence works pretty well, right? And I bet there's going to be robots. Like, what? So, and then commercial real estate is a ticking time. So he's at once says that the whole inflation thing is, and the reserve currency that can come from printing too much money is a really big problem. He doesn't exactly understand it. It's not the same as which we've said many times here, that government debt is not at all the same as personal debt and shouldn't just be compared. Oh, you're a person who makes $80,000, but you have $1 million credit card bill, right? It's not exactly that, right? It's not exactly that. So, he gets to that point and says those things. But at the same time, he comes out and says that commercial real estate only depends right now on borrowing non-recourse. And he says that all of commercial real estate is a ticking time bomb and the Fed holds the button. So imagine he's saying that money printing, we don't know how dangerous it is, yet at the same time, commercial real estate is dangerous. And the solution is the Fed printing more money, but that's dangerous. But they can do it or not, right? So really not himself taking any responsibility here for his myth that's been built around him, right? He's the oracle. He's supposed to have all these answers. People go to him and it's popcorn time and, oh, this is stupid and that is stupid. My house is fake. See you later. 13-year-old girl stumps him. All right. 13-year-old girl stumps him. So, was he out there saying, no, I'm not an anti-Warren Buffett guy at all, right? At all. Like, I think he's great. But the amount of attention this meeting that he had on the weekend has gotten over the years, probably justified in the 90s, probably justified in the 2000s. Probably a lot of people have made money following what he says in these meetings. But as we come up into a time of incredible change that we're dealing with right now, where it looks like personal responsibility is becoming one of the big fulcrums over which all the world is fighting right now. It is really a question of, do you take responsibility and understand that you have a role to play in the financial system? You have a role to play as a financial participant. You have a role to play in saving your money in a way that will help you, help society. And so for him to abdicate and not even offer solutions, right? Now, he might not have them, right? That's fine, right? He might not have them. But when we stop and take a look at this division, we realize that the personal responsibility piece that we see all around us every day is becoming more and more important. We were talking about the energy piece and what's happening in Germany and in America, and Germany simply being energy illiterate, literally not taking responsibility for anything right now, right? So now an individual in Germany for sure is all about, not eating steak because they've been told they're going to go vegetarian. It's going to be better for them. That's not exactly the personal responsibility we're talking about here, right? The personal responsibility really comes from information, from being able to understand what's going on, especially with energy systems, right? So as the Germans celebrated their nuclear shutdown, they're losing businesses, as we mentioned, right? American companies buying the biggest heat pump maker in Germany and is now going to build it with US energy, right? So there's all of this attention now on energy literacy all of a sudden. And it looks like the people who understand energy, the people who understand how it works, the people who understand how to make it, the people who understand energy grids themselves are going to have a major advantage, right? They're not going to be left begging for centralized systems to make energy for them. They're not going to be left worried about what's going on with, there was a big windstorm and it destroyed all this stuff. Bitcoin folks are already thinking about building or have already built their own energy systems. I know on my farm, I'm definitely going to be putting in my own energy systems. I will definitely be using Bitcoin miners to get the most out of those energy systems so that the energy isn't wasted when I'm not there, isn't wasted when I get a lot of it. On my property, I get a lot of wind, I get a lot of sun. I'm sure I'm going to have extra of each and I need a place to put it. I'm not going to sell it back to the grid. I'm not getting involved in all that stuff. It's my energy. I'm going to use it for myself, right? Maybe my neighbor can run an extension cord if they really need it, but we can get batteries, we can get all those things. And so the accent now on personal responsibility around energy literacy, right? It's not about not eating steak. It's about understanding how energy systems work. Not quite as sexy, but that's where the personal responsibility value really is, right? The value in personal responsibility and understanding energy grids is there. So here's what Bitcoiners have learned over the years, right? We learned ultimately that cryptography was a field of personal responsibility. It should never have been abdicated to third parties, to certificate authorities, to authority systems, to top-down structures. So at the very base level, understanding how to interact on the internet, understanding how to form commercial relationships in the digital world, Bitcoiners understood from the start that this was a personal responsibility issue. This moved into our understanding of finance. And it still sort of tracks the human resource migration that I've always said is predictive in Bitcoin. And what is the human resource migration? It starts exactly on this thread, right? It started with the cryptographers immediately who understood personal responsibility and the use of cryptographic keys as probably the most vital thing going forward, which is really what launches the schism between Bitcoiners and other folks. The next group are the political folks, right? The political folks enter right away because they come with personal responsibility in financial literacy, right? So they're the ones who attract the Wall Street people, right? So I've mentioned before many times my human resource migration into Bitcoin historic travel log, let's say, right? That I think is predictive. That's why I always mention it. So it starts with the cryptographers, it goes to the political people, right? That's how I learned about it. I learned about it from the political side. The Wall Street people come in next. That's how I ended up spending time on Wall Street. I didn't know anything about Wall Street before. Even when I was working for the Senate Banking Committee, I understood bank law. That's not Wall Street. It's not even close. I learned about Wall Street on Wall Street, right? I was in the Wall Street stock exchange very regularly because, of course, it was bought by Bitcoiners, right? The Jeffrey Sprecher is a Bitcoiner, right? He learned about Bitcoin because he's like a Porsche mechanic and was missing parts, and so there he was, right? He bought the New York Stock Exchange years ago because he became so successful in energy markets. And it was energy literacy. He understood that there was no marketplace after Enron or during. He understood that Enron itself was a problem for energy markets in America because it had the whole cake. It had a monopoly on those early energy markets where futures were traded, where everything was being traded around energy on this really low budget exchange, Enron, and a total scam in the end, obviously. So he was funded and backed because those participants suspected something was wrong with Enron. And so he was the legit second option and made a ton of money off of that and ended up buying exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange, right? So he's not even a finance guy. He just understood markets and got into Bitcoin and created Backed as a Bitcoin settled marketplace in the New York Stock Exchange for those reasons. So I learned about the Wall Street thing, and that's part of the migration that comes through. So it goes cryptographers first who understand personal responsibility around private key management. Then it goes to financial and political folks who understood financial literacy as a really important vector. And now if you look next week in Miami, lots of stuff about energy. You can see it more and more that Bitcoiners are learning about energy literacy and understanding the importance of energy literacy. And it looks like energy literacy is one of the most important factors in what's going on in World War III. If you don't understand energy literacy, you can't have an opinion. You can't even have an opinion on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and Germany and Europe. You can't even think about it and be taken seriously because energy literacy is how you can actually cut through all of the propaganda and the noise and see what's really going on over there. Now, there's stuff that's still hidden from us. You still have to do a bit of mind reading to get an to really push an understanding of what's going on there or to predict what's going on. But energy literacy is enough for you to understand which side people are on and what they're really fighting for and what's going on there. So once you take a look at energy literacy as it is, right, you're going to start to understand that the whole divide, and those are the new people coming to Bitcoin, right? It's the people who understand energy literacy, the people who understand load balancing of grids, who understand decentralizing a grid, why you would want to do it, how it could be done, how it could be paid for is the most important thing. So Bitcoiners are bringing together those two vital subjects of financial literacy and energy literacy and really smushing them together to get this, I think, winning cocktail for how we get out of World War III, for how we get out of the troubles that we're in. And it really does come down to personal responsibility. It looks like we're dealing with a fight between some people who are fine with following experts, fine with top-down structures, fine with, and honestly, 99% of the time, you should probably listen to the experts, right? Like, it's rare that they're totally wrong, right? But if they're off in a completely wrong field and not even asking the right questions because they're not literate, that's the situation we find ourselves in right now, right? We find ourselves in a situation where everyone's stressed about limiting consumption and thinking that's personal responsibility, but it's simply not the case, right? The case here is understanding how energy systems are deployed and understanding which energy systems you should back. So here's the good news, right? Here's the good news. I've got this from Angelica Ong, and she goes through all of the small modular nuclear reactors that are ready now to be commercially important, to be deployed. She's Taiwanese. So here's what she says. She has a whole Twitter thread, right? And it's related. I'll explain why. It's related to what's going on in this German case. Again, so the Germans celebrated no nuclear energy, right? And this is what happens when you believe in experts too much and don't actually take the time to become energy literate and understand that you're being spun and understand that you're being rolled, right? So while many experts would understand the situation with energy consumption in Europe and energy consumption in Germany, and they'll say, "Oh, we have to do this, or we're going to die," or blah blah blah. Well, what happens when this sort of stuff goes down? So here's what Holger Japitz, that's my father's name, by the way, says: "Good morning from Germany, which, despite an insanely expensive energy turnaround, does not have a single world-class green champion on their stock market." So the biggest virtue signalers going about personal responsibility in eating and consuming less, right? But no winners in the corporate sense that have brought interesting companies and value propositions to fix the world, right? So, and this is what they say: the sale of the heat pump manufacturer Weissman to US based Carrier Global doesn't make things easier. The largest listed German green company is an SMA Solar with stock market valuation at $3.2 billion. All green listed companies combined are worth $16 billion. Carrier Global alone is worth $31 billion. And they are the ones who bought this Weissman green energy thing, right? So now the argument here is that because the Germans have gotten rid of energy, they're going to lose even their manufacturing edge, and people who deploy small modular nuclear reactors are going to take a major advantage. So here's Angela Ong's breakdown of exactly what is available to people who understand what's going on with energy and are energy literate. So they've got the AP300 SMR, which is, I think, made by, no, that's not the Hitachi one. I don't know who makes this AP300 SMR. But anyway, then we've got a Hitachi one, right? And it's a sure thing, she says. It's an experienced company, Japanese made. It's got customers around the world already. And it's a first of a kind deployment, but it looks like the customers that they're dealing with have put in nuclear before, so they should be fine. You get NewScale that I've brought up here before. And it's got a first of its kind carbon-free power project. So they're waiting because of that for a first user, but it's looks like it's on the horizon. You get what was it called again? Last Mile, I think it was the one that just sold a bunch of reactors to the UK. It's an American one. Rolls-Royce, right? So this one is totally factory made. Now they haven't sold any of them yet, and the CEO is fired. And I've been trying to get these guys to come and speak at our events for a long time, and they keep saying no. So they've definitely got some problems. You've got another one, XE100 by X Energy. That it's really for industrial usage. They already have a deal with Dow Chemical, so they're doing fine. TerraPower, another one that's going to be deployed. Holtec, another one that's building out of old decommissioned reactors that they can use. And so anyway, there's a whole bunch of solutions out there that are coming quickly, some better than others. But the point is, these things can be, once the ball gets rolling as far as financing and implementing these, the scale and size of them mean that folks that are Bitcoin miners, folks that have the capacity to load balance and help finance these things, are going to have a million reasons to build them all over the world, because the desire now to decentralize the grid for many reasons is going to be well understood by more and more people taking, again, personal responsibility around their own understanding of energy, right? Their own understanding of how you build these grids, what makes them work, what makes them useful. So between those two subjects, right, you start getting a sense of what I would say is a better understanding of when you're being rolled, what's useful information, when folks are clearly trying to spin you, which is, again, the whole story in Ukraine and Russia and what's going on in Germany. If you don't understand energy, if you're energy illiterate and you think Greta's feelings or eating no steak is the answer to any of this stuff, right? You can't have an opinion. Like, you're not welcome at the table anymore, because people who understand the motivations behind decentralizing the energy grid or centralizing it further understand really what's at stake and what's being fought over. That's the fight, right? The fight is about energy. It is about what sources are going to create it, where it's going to come from, who's going to pay for it, how they're going to pay for it, and what is going to be done with the energy once it's created. So Bitcoiners have an incredible head start on all of these subjects. It's something that I've said many, many times, that Bitcoiners, because they have consistently and through their own networks been able to achieve a level of starting with personal responsibility around understanding key management, how the internet works, understanding identity on the internet, authentication on the internet, the security holes that the previous PKI system created. Once you go from there and you start understanding financial literacy, then you get a much more accurate picture of what's going on in the world. And once you add to that energy literacy, then you can really start to understand what needs to happen for us to get out of World War III. And those are probably the most important subjects in the world. And it means that Bitcoiners, because we have seen these things coming, we've predicted this in many ways, right? We've predicted the importance of energy literacy, of financial literacy, because of the problems that were coming. We've been saying it for 10 years, that these problems were coming. And because we were able to predict it, what I like to always underline is that Bitcoiners have more playable characters in the game today, vis-a-vis the total number of players playing in this whatever is going on World War III situation. The concentration of Bitcoiners goes up simply because everyone else falls away, right? They're not ready for this problem. They're literate maybe in just Wall Street stuff, but not the energy piece. They're literate in the energy piece, but not the government piece and the control piece, right? So Bitcoiners filled with playable characters, and those playable characters stay at the table. The NPCs, the non-playable characters, just get shoved off with every tumultuous change in the market, so they're not around anymore, right? Now, you can even relate that to this, and this is something that is I think going to affect some Bitcoiners as far as being a playable character, a non-playable character. It's what's going on right now with the mining fees and the intense usage of the Bitcoin blockchain. So here's the way to understand it in terms of energy literacy and in terms of financial literacy, and why I think what's going on right now with inscriptions and BRC20s are a really good thing. And I'll explain it, right? So Bitcoiners, so this is sort of the summary of energy literacy and financial literacy, and I think a problem that Bitcoiners are coming up to, but I think we're all going to make it as Bitcoiners. We're going to figure this out. And here's what it looks like. The financial literacy side of Bitcoin, history, education, that a lot of people joined in and were attracted to Bitcoin because of the financial arguments, right? A lot of people understand Federal Reserve, they understand money, they understand the top-down control, they understand the difference between Austrian school and Keynesian school. They understand that sound money is really important, right? If you're going to have the right feedback loops for a system and push it forward. But here's the thing. They stick on Bitcoin, the coin, as a commodity. And if they stay with that, they're 100% right? That is the whole story if you're only looking at the financial literacy, Bitcoin as a commodity side. But there's another commodity involved in Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself, the coin, a commodity, it trades. It's on, the commodity exchange in Chicago. It has been for a long time. It's deemed a commodity by regulators in America. It's a commodity like any other, like oil, like not onions, the only non-commodity in the U.S. system. So it is, and movie tickets, by the way, if you want to know what's not a commodity in America, officially movie tickets and onions for historic reasons. It's a commodity, right? Like corn and all those things. However, there is one more commodity, and this is where a lot of Bitcoiners get confused, right? Block space is a commodity too. It's a separate commodity to the actual coin, right? Block space is a commodity. And now that you see the block reward for the first time in history was larger for fees than it was in the mining subsidy last night. Now, people like me have been predicting that this is a really important factor going forward, because if Bitcoin doesn't find a way to subsidize miners, our whole plan to build nuclear reactors is somewhat limited, right? We need those miners. We have to incentivize their selfishness. There's no way around it. We need more money for their work. For proof of work to happen, we need proof of more work, right? We need more jobs for them to do. So now that you have this system where Bitcoiners are confusing the commodity of Bitcoin with the commodity of block space, and they're saying it's an attack on Bitcoin, right? It's an attack on Bitcoin. Yeah, it sucks that things are slow, but we got to figure that out. But the actual idea that high fees on Bitcoin is a bad thing is never been true, right? I have in a tool that I created years ago for CoinDesk to measure the whole market versus Bitcoin, to use Bitcoin as a denominator to measure crypto networks to see if they're growing healthy compared to the standard network that we know grew healthy and is a great thing, Bitcoin. And that's what I did. I just took a bunch of data points and I would divide them by Bitcoin. Now, I would do that with transaction fees. Therefore, a higher score was gotten if your transaction fees were higher than Bitcoin's. Higher than Bitcoin transaction fee was a good thing in my system, simply because it showed interest in the market. It showed that there was a demand for the commodity of block space. And now that we're creating a new market for demand of the commodity of Bitcoin block space, you start to see the actual economic scenario past the halvings that will allow and incentivize more energy participants. So energy literacy is being forced into the Bitcoin field at the personal responsibility level, where we understand how the Bitcoin network reacts and can actually harness this power in order to create even more energy for the world. So I think it's a good thing, right? Prices at the third world for now. But look, we're not the whole Bitcoin thing, for me anyway, the hyper Bitcoinization happening in the short term happens through the energy markets by incentivizing and making the energy companies want to restore their wealth. That's how you separate money and state, right? You separate money and state by getting the strongest participants, like the banks or the energy companies, to be on your side, right? Like against the state. That's what you want. That's how you do it. Now, I agree. I want everyone in the world to have Bitcoin as the operating system for measuring their wealth and for measuring the economy, right? That's its ultimate goal, is as a measuring tool, as a measuring stick for GDP, for economic growth, for economic usage. But the first stage of that, so Bitcoin has already done it for the shitcoin market, right? That was like the first thing we became and that was what my tool at CoinDesk measured. It was Bitcoin as a measuring stick for everything. Therefore, you could gauge, like, what does hash rate mean unless it's relative to Bitcoin's hash rate? It means nothing. These are numbers that you can't compute. They're too big. You can tell me petra hashes and all this stuff. I don't know what you're talking about. And I look at it every day. The number is simply too big to intellectualize. But I can tell you, if it's half of Bitcoin's, that's pretty good. If it's a tenth of Bitcoin's, it's not as good. If it's not even measurable compared to Bitcoin's, it sucks. And that's a way to get it. If someone just said to you it's a hexa hash or whatever, you'd say, oh, what does that mean? Nothing. It means nothing. Trade pairs, for example, right? What does it mean that a coin has 500 trade pairs? I don't know. If I know Bitcoin has 5,000 and it has 10%, that's something. Then I can tell, because you can assume, if you're measuring trade pairs, that Bitcoin has the most, and it does. So you look at things relative to Bitcoin to get a meaning of them in the crypto industry. There's no way to get a meaning of crypto unless you measure it by Bitcoin. And that'll be the same going forward for everything. So energy, the economy, you measure it in Bitcoin, and then you get a sense of what it actually is. That's Bitcoin's ultimate tool. It's not so that people in the third world don't have to suffer from their tyrant governments. That's a big byproduct of what's going on, and that's where it heads. But that's not the first station of hyper-Bitcoinization, as far as I can tell. As far as I can tell, the first station in hyper-Bitcoinization is getting the energy companies to, for example, denominate an energy market in Bitcoin and settle energy contracts in Bitcoin instead of the dollar, because the dollar is too unpredictable. It's become political. They don't want it. They don't want the BRICS shitcoin either, for the same reasons. So they use something else to measure the success and or failure of the energy industry. And if that happens, then all the other things happen. Like we want to, what Warren Buffett was saying, and he's totally right. Too many financial engineers, too many financial money managers, wealth managers. 100% agree with that. I've always agreed. That's Warren Buffett's great contribution to the history of late stage fiat, whatever has been going on all these years. So the idea now that we can get energy priced in Bitcoin will help the whole world eventually. And we won't be that far away from it after. But the point is to get the energy companies in. And part of that has to do with us understanding our own energy literacy and being able to have a sense of what Bitcoin as a commodity and block space as a commodity are, right? They're not the same thing. They use the word commodity. they look the same, but Bitcoin block space versus the Bitcoin block space versus the Bitcoin commodity is an important thing. So Austin says UA will be the first to have energy quoted in BTC. It might be Texas. My feeling is Texas, simply because at a certain point, the US dollar is just not going to be a useful tool to measure success. And if it's not a useful tool to measure success, that's how you start getting balance sheet changing. But, I just don't think it has to be countries. And Austin says probably 7 to 15 years from now. My prediction is much sooner, much, much sooner. I predict within a couple of years, right? A couple of years, honestly, a couple of years. So there you go. Let's see. I got a bunch of quotes here, a bunch of comments. What about Greta's feelings? Yeah, not a good way to do energy programs, right? Not good. I'll tell you what I think about weather. We need more bureaucrats flying to conferences in private jets. Everyone knows that's the only way to fix the weather. Yeah. Government's hell-bent on keeping you scared and ignorant. The internet is the thorn in their side, and they know it. Yeah, I'm down with that. What is Greta's feelings? We need to know. Oh, Johnny, we'll miss you, man. Come around next time. It's kind of sad that we're using a child with mental condition as a shield. It is. I mean, honestly, I laugh at Greta, but it doesn't look like a happy kid, man. I don't want a mind reader. Maybe she is. Who knows? But it doesn't look cool. I don't like seeing any of the kids. I mean, it's not so much Greta that makes me feel that way. I hate seeing any of these young kids who are pessimistic about the future, not knowing that we're on the cusp of an actual golden age. Like an actual golden age is around the corner. And my kids are going to grow up in a golden age, an actual golden age. And that there's kids out there, like they have cousins that are worried about the future. They go to these Toronto private schools. Everybody's got mental health issues. They're all on drugs, like the kids. And they're all stressed out about that. You should hear them when they talk about the environment. I laid the hard truth on one of them the other day because she was like, oh, she was saying to my kids about like killing cows for steaks. And I was like, well, you like rabbits, right? Well, stop eating carrots. Do you know how many rabbits have to, what has to be killed to have a vegetable farm? Everything has to go. Everything in the air, everything in the ground, all of it dead. You can't have a vegetable farm with critters running around. You got to kill everything, right? What happens with beef? You don't have to like nothing. You don't have to kill anything. Zero. They don't like mice, I guess. They don't love mice, so you got to kill some mice, I guess. That's about it, right? These fees are fueled by altcoins. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The use and the demand for Bitcoin block space has to be great no matter what going forward. It just has to be, right? There's a lot of good things happen when miners make money, and the more money miners make, first of all, the more scaling solutions you're going to have for Bitcoin, right? And at the same time, the more miners you're going to have plug in. So what we saw last night, the historic thing we saw last night about the miner subsidy being higher than the block reward, I think is a great sign. I've been arguing for high Bitcoin fees for a long, long time. Not that I don't want to see third world people cut out, but I don't want to see Bitcoin die as a science experiment either, right? And you talk to a lot of these devs, they'll tell you they still think it's in beta. It's not in beta, right? It's live. We don't have time to tinker with everything, and so there's a lot of reason why Bitcoiners have have a lot of. I mean, we're already there. People understand. I think are starting to understand this dichotomy of Bitcoin block space as a commodity and Bitcoin as a commodity. It's not. The arguments seem to get blended in together. We got to keep them apart, and that's the important part. She's the face of whole Europe youth even further, so not sorry for pointing the obvious. Yeah, she's not doing great. We don't like it. Earners can own their own bank, mini energy grid, ISP, and can produce essentials from microchips to homes. Yeah, the microchip thing is hard. I think we're better off the way it is right now. Hard to get them. That's going to save Bitcoin, that you can't even make the ASICs without like intense expertise. So no one can catch up to how many have been made. That's a good thing. That's a good thing, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, it does. I really don't care about the fees. I transact a few times a year. The rest on Lightning. The fees are insignificant too. Yeah, I'm with you on that, Bitcoin graffiti. But again, the demand for block space is great, right? We want to see that. Yeah, exactly. Ran more. Yeah. I actively price energy in Bitcoin, and I do that. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, very good, HBDC. Yeah. Yeah, indeed, Austin. She has grown. Yeah, she's fair game to criticize 100%. She was always. I mean, the minute you take a public stand the way she did, you had to be able to criticize her because it was using a child as a shield, which is just bad form. Bad form. It's Emerald City Syndrome. So Bitcoin graffiti for all everyone here with the Breakup gang. Bitcoin graffiti does really interesting work on Wizard of Oz. That's how I met Bitcoin graffiti. I did a show months ago on Wizard of Oz. So those of you who don't know, have a look at some of his writing and comparisons. So here's what he says. It's Emerald City Syndrome. Emerald City being the Oz Emerald City. They can't see the future through the dollar lenses as they see everything getting more expensive, where technology is bringing the deflationary freedom. Yeah, I can get down with that. Have Brendan Quittem talk to RFK Jr. RE Nuclear. Again, I haven't heard a new quote from RFK on nuclear, but my guess is it's fake news, recycling old things he said. Now, if he said something new, I stand corrected. I just haven't seen. I've been looking for it, but I think he said so many things over the years. And if your opinion on nuclear from the 90s, when he was probably quoted on nuclear energy because he was an environmental guy, it wouldn't apply now, right? We've learned a lot. Things have changed. And so our ability to manage risk around nuclear energy is way greater than it was. So I think there's a lot of stuff coming out from RFK that are old quotes, but don't quote me on that. I might be wrong. I've been looking. So if you see a new quote, share it in the comments one day, and we'll talk about it. But I just haven't seen anything relevant to nuclear. But I haven't seen every interview. I love RFK content, and I had some stuff on RFK today that I missed. About the cheating, it's about the cheating. It's about the scams that are going on in New Hampshire. So we don't, I was going to tie it into some of the literacy stuff. It's David Sachs saying that Biden is not even placing his name on the ballot in Iowa and New Hampshire. And so they're going to treat it like it's not part of the order. I don't know. We've been talking about this a bunch, right? They changed the order of the primaries, and it's supposed to start in South Carolina now. Traditionally, they always start in Iowa and New Hampshire. So it looks like they're going to, I think it's a management thing. They don't want the narrative to get out that Kennedy beat Biden in the early terms, so he probably won't run. There are not a lot of points, so it doesn't matter. Thanks, Emmanuel. Good content and energy. We're doing our best, man. We're here to bring you energy literacy on this show as much as financial literacy and media literacy and those things, right? That's the theme here. Though the surge is short-term, long-term will increase Bitcoin adoption. Yeah. And Austin says, I fear Bitcoin graffiti is correct and the transaction fees may drop again. But he's got another comment here. Hold on. I agree, Nolan, what you said about Greta. Yeah. Austin says BIP 300, and Austin was messaged me about BIP 300 being on the schedule, on the agenda at Bitcoin 2023 next week, guys. It's next week. Unreal. I'm going to work on that today, Austin. I'm going to work on that today. We're going to try and figure that out. See if there's a spot for it. I already reserved a mystery spot. We're going to see if it comes to fruition. It was from his own mouth. Was that from me, Robert? Oh, it was from his own mouth. We're talking about recent unheard podcast. Didn't hear the whole unheard one. I saw the all in one. But if that's the case, Kay, I trust you, Robert. Again, I don't know exactly his comments on nuclear energy, but if he's wrong, we're going to deal with that, right? We got to get good people there. And I think Brandon is one of those ones. Yeah. He has a financial argument against it. Well, I'd like to hear it. He's a serious man. I would take any of his arguments seriously, right? Okay, I'm getting all that stuff here. Okay, there we go. His bottom line is it's too financially risky. Good place to turn off K around about nuclear. Yeah, Bushmaster, I'm going to work on that. You're right. All in pod, he said it's not good. Okay, yeah, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that. Didn't hear that. Insurance companies won't touch it. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm getting all that. Yeah, I'm getting all the information now that I needed, guys. Thanks. Sounds like difficult to employ as a commodity. You're pointing out a subtle point that there. I hope I can memify it so readily appreciate. Yeah, yeah. The commodity thing's important. Block space is a commodity. Bitcoin is a commodity. It's not the same commodity. Not the same commodity. And I fear that the people who see it in terms of Bitcoin standard, commodity, simple, lower the IQ to participate in the financial system, lower the IQ to save money. What Warren Buffett said, love that. What Warren Buffett said, too many financial engineers, not lower the IQ to participate, but too many financial engineers. Again, Warren Buffett's contribution, don't hire a financial wealth manager, buy the index, right? You don't need these people. So totally down with that. But that frame for Bitcoin misses the Bitcoin commodity space. And that requires you to think a little differently than Bitcoin as a commodity. Block space is a commodity, Bitcoin is a commodity. I understand what you're saying about ASICs, and it's something I think about. Tech is deflationary. Yeah. All right, team. I got a lot of them here. Is also a physical network. It sure is. Yeah. I agree with that. CK, I agree with that. Definitely is. All right, team. I would love to keep it going, but I got stuff to do today. So see y'all tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. And let's get at it. We're gonna have a great day. Peace, everyone.